Delighted to introduce once more Mr. Atul Gupta. People who have been who attended the Pocket CIO last year know him, and those who don't, so I'll just give you a brief introduction about him. So Atul is a director at KPMG India, and he leads the North operations for the firm's IT advisory service practice. He's qualified as an engineer and an MBA, and he's also a CISA and a CIRIS certified professional. And he has over 15 years in providing IT advisory services. So he works extensively in IT consulting, risk management, and his focus areas in providing solutions for information security, IT sourcing, data privacy, and business resilience. Atul is also the information security officer for KPMG in India, so for the entire organization, and he's a very active contributor in the field of IT security. So he's contributed a number of papers, articles, and to books in the area of IT security. And today his lecture will be on thinking strategically about IT. So please welcome Mr. Atul.
Thanks and good morning, everyone. I think I'm the one who started the session delayed, so apologies for that. While I was walking in for the session, and while the theme was being talked upon, the strategy of IT, or how to think strategically about IT, I was constantly thinking, what is the key theme, or what's the key objective that each one of you, when you walk out of the session, should be carrying away with you? And I believe it should not be more than one or two key objectives which should be ascertained or should be accomplished as we walk through this session of next 90 minutes. And I was thinking through, and technology is now known by everyone, so even a kid knows how to operate technology, isn't it? So it's very difficult to establish saying what should be the objective, and many times IT is getting so consumerized that people don't really appreciate the value of IT. And that's when I picked up, and I don't know how many of you picked up, what's been going on in Microsoft at this point of time, where the CEO has already decided to move on in next 12 months period. And there was a session which happened earlier this week, probably yesterday or day before. That's the kind of a time when it happened. It was kind of a 4.5-hour long session where Microsoft was addressing their stakeholders, including the media at large. And one thing which Steve Ballmer said, while he had a whole lot of accomplishments to be made upon, one of the areas where he said that we were so deeply involved in looking inside us that we completely ignored what Apple was doing to the entire ecosystem. And probably we left out or we missed out on that complete cycle. So the acquisition of Nokia and so on and so forth is fairly reactive at this point of time. And then the key point or key message which I derived out of this is completely saying that how technology can be so nimble-footed. How can you be so proactively identifying the changes which are happening, the trends which are emerging, and how quickly do you adopt it? It's a very clear story for Microsoft, and Steve Ballmer accepted it in front of everyone, saying that we are so grossly and so passionately involved in our Microsoft Office solutions that we just believe that's the way things have to be. While things were changing constantly outside, we were completely ignoring it. The good thing is, we are not ignoring it now. The not so good thing is, we took time to realize it. So that's one key objective which I want to really have as a takeaway from this session, saying that when we start looking at strategically on IT, it's not the traditional way of how IT was looked upon. It's a going forward way which is changing so fast, and the business expectations are changing completely as we move forward from here. Just I'll give you some a glimpse of what's happening at this point in time. So number of things are happening. The challenge is all of it is happening at the same time. Let's look at it. I think some of these terms like BYOD and all those are now passé. Consumerization of IT is what everyone is talking about. What does it really mean? Does it mean movement from a desktop laptop to a tablet or a smartphone kind of an environment? Possibly yes. And the challenges which are associated with it, Giri talked about my introduction, and I think in my role internally in my organization, I'm struggling now today. How do I support all my mobile applications and email on iOS 7? That's come out, that's out there. Users want to be on it because there are so many features, but we as technology, have we been able to scale up so much at that pace and with the changes that are happening that we are able to provide that kind of a user experience? We are challenged. And globally we are saying that we will take at least 3 months before we can make our email applications available on iOS 7. That's the kind of a catch-up situation in which we are getting into. So in past, it didn't make so much of a difference, but now we're looking in a time environment which is changing so fast. Things have changed completely. The way the expectations are there from technology in terms of saying that how does the business really look forward for the information being captured? It was all in past, different sources, different places, but today it has to be online, it has to be synchronized, it has to be available on a click of a button. Picture, audio enabled, searchable. My interactions with CIOs in the country today tell me that the biggest challenge with the CIOs run today, and that's the key expectation which the management has or the business has, is how do you make the entire unstructured data be more indexable and searchable, because that's what is the expectation which is coming from technology. In past, it was always very clearly said that's something which is unstructured data. Adoption of social media, I think that's such a huge significant shift. I remember a point of time when most of the organizations would say, social media, we won't allow it from corporate network. To the place where we have reached upon, where every organization is looking upon how do they make sure their presence is on social media and how do they use social media for themselves to connect with their employees. And that's a significant shift which is happening. Whole lot of new platforms which are emerging, Tibber, YAML, and so on and so forth. I'm sure some of the people who are sitting in this room, I know them, and I know what's happening in their organizations at this point of time. And social media adoption and social media usage is a given at this moment. It comes with its whole set of challenges. And is it a technology solution? Is it a business solution? It's a debate which has been going on. And I think the perspective which I'm just trying to establish again, the changes are happening so fast, and power of the media is so important, or the platform is so important, we really can't ignore that power of that platform. We already talked of changes, some of these, possibly what I've already talked about. Technological changes, for a given, the time period for the change of technology has, if nothing else, has just got reduced upon significantly. So the catch-up mode is significantly higher. Behavioral changes, I think that's so important, and I don't know how many of you face this or how many of you have interacted with your HR, where HR comes and gives you that feedback saying that the people who are now joining, the new crowd which is joining from the campuses, they're saying, do you allow social media in your organization? Because that's the way for us to interact. And it's, if the social media is not allowed, they're not even looking to join those organizations. Changes in the marketplace. A digital marketing strategy or digital media strategy has become such an important initiative across organizations today. And again, the boundaries are very blurred. Is it an initiative which should be run by the markets team, or is it an initiative which should be run by technologies team? And there is no right or wrong answer. I was on a call yesterday with a large organization, again with the CIO, from a financial services industry perspective. And they were talking about how they have completely digitally enabled their processes and they are in the B2C kind of a business, where the consumers, rather than walking into their offices or interacting with people from their offices, can do everything on an internet, a B2C platform. And why internet? Using mobility channels. And they developed a complete channel around it. What technology guys are struggling today, the CIO mentioned it to me yesterday, saying that we really don't know, while we have done the best, what we can do using technology, but we really don't know from a consumer perspective, have we done it in the best possible manner or not? And can you guys come in and help us understand from a consumer perspective, is it the best thing what we have done or not? And that's where the interface is really coming upon, because technologically, they have done what the best it can be done. But business is really looking upon saying that, hey, who's going to use it? Is it the consumer? Have you factored in that while you are designing this entire thing? And most of the times, technology comes back and says that while we looked upon how the process works, while we thought it should be right, but we really haven't factored that in. So those are the kind of marketplace changes which are happening upon. So what all are we talking? This is the external environment changes which are happening at this point of time, which is driving a lot of new areas in which IT needs to focus, the CIO needs to focus. But at the same point of time, there's a whole lot of expectation which is now coming from the management as well. So One of the key expectations which is coming is saying that CIO needs to become very smart and start looking upon from a transformation which has to be more from a CapEx oriented transformation to an OpEx oriented. I use the wrong word, transformation. It's more moving from a model of a CapEx to an OpEx. And the model has got stabilized today. And in past, 24 months ago, 36 months ago, there was always a debate saying that how do you use that model? There are a whole lot of successful ways that the model is today being used upon, and the CFOs are standing up and saying that, hey CIO, if the world is moving in that direction, why are we not moving in that direction? And that's a common thing which I hear across. IT enablement for productivity and utilization. I think when it comes on to mobility, one of the biggest reason why organizations are adopting mobility is to address that point. Most organizations have this pain point saying that the senior executives travel so much, and there are a whole lot of workflows which don't get moved upon because those people are not available. Is mobility providing that kind of an advantage today? The answer is very clearly yes. But does it come with its own set of challenges? Yes. But as a CFO or a CXO of the organization, they are expecting the heads of CIO or heads of IT to actually start proactively thinking about and how it can be integrated well with that kind of a platform. Again, I'll give you an example. We were helping an organization, a fairly large size organization, which has developed a huge thing around mobility in terms of putting the entire process together on how you should be allowing, what kind of devices should be allowed, what kind of support should be provided upon, and so on and so forth. The challenge really starts coming upon when you really look upon what are the various application portfolio which you have in your organization, and how does that get synced back with a kind of a mobility channel. It's not easy, but that's the expectation. The expectation today is, the CXO says that their kids can operate a Facebook, their kids can operate any of the social media site, and why do we need in our organization to run a training program for people to be able to understand the application the way they should be running upon? That's the kind of a shift which is coming upon. So it's IT enablement, which has to be completely looked from a productivity utilization gains. Global governance. I think that's a topic which has been discussed to death. Governance, multiple dimensions which have come over a period of time. It all started by saying how do you govern it internally. Then came the entire outsourcing boom, where it was saying that how do you govern the entire vendor portfolio in which you operate upon, or the partners with whom you operate upon. And today we are saying, when you don't manage the assets, you allow people to bring in their own assets. How do you govern in that kind of environment? The global governance is becoming increasingly more important, and some of the industries where the regulators are very stringent, that's becoming even more challenging as we move forward from here. Consolidation of global IT supplier base, again very interesting thing, because technology inherently, if you see, and the area where we are sitting, Nehru Place, it's known for providing the various kind of IT supplies, right? And over a period of time, most of the organizations, for various reasons, have been using multiple IT supplier base. But the CFOs today are going back and saying that how are we looking strategically at our service providers? How are we looking strategically at our vendors who are supporting us to enable and deliver IT operations on a consistent basis? Are we looking at the volumes? Are we looking at the size which we are looking at the service providers or vendors to come upon? And is that strategic thought going in? Many times you identify that that strategic thought may not have gone in, and that's where the challenge really is coming, saying that how can we consolidate globally the IT supplier base. There's a whole lot of thought which has been going on from in the emerging markets. What the global corporations are looking from an emerging markets perspective. And if you really see upon some of the thoughts and some of the indicators which are coming upon, the first one says that deploy, manage a portfolio of global applications augmented with local ones. Now, there's never a right or a wrong answer. The global organizations with significantly large presence in emerging markets, should they continue with something which they have globally, or should they build upon something which is locally? I'll again give a case study. I was again intensely involved in another large organization. It's a global organization which grows inorganically. So this is a US-based organization which is into education business, and they go across the regions, they acquire universities, and they merge those universities as part of their parent organization. And since it's a US based organization, they have fairly mature IT systems which are available from US. The question came upon when they started acquisitions in Asia Pacific region, specifically in India, Singapore, China, Malaysia, Thailand. Those are the kind of countries where they were doing acquisition. They suddenly realized the cost of IT which comes in from US is so high, and when they start looking at the revenue or the fees per student which they get in the emerging markets or developed markets already, is fairly commensurate to the kind of the cost of IT which is coming. So it makes a logical sense, it makes a complete financial sense to use IT which is based out of US. But when the same cost of IT gets apportioned upon Asia Pacific region, where the fees paid by per student is nearly 1/10 of what is being paid in the US or in the Mexico market, the entire proposition becomes infeasible. And that's where the challenge really comes upon. How do these organizations start looking upon from an emerging markets perspective? Because economies are very different, the scale, size, volume is very different, the language requirement may be very different, the culture in which we are operating is very different. So that those are the kind of challenges which are being looked upon. Enablement of ramp up of business operations, which is always the key. Again, the same case which I picked up, saying that the acquisition or the inorganic growth is the strategy for this organization. And the expectation at a minimum which is there from the business, from IT, is to say that how can you provide us infrastructure services at a minimum. And it's not easy because there are global standards what you want to do vis-a-vis what you can do in that kind of a time frame. So whole lot of different views, different points which are emerging upon. And then comes the most classical environment, which is an organization which is starting up, and what should be the priorities from CIO's perspective. Again, whole set of thoughts which go into it, and what better place to be talking about on this rather than India, where we have seen so much of startups coming upon, so much of technology investment happening at this point of time. So again, the expectation is to have IT backbone to support core business processes, which is fairly understandable. Implement efficient and flexible IT service infrastructure. I think that's the most important point which I really see. And again, based on my interactions with multiple business heads who are setting up their organization, and if you remember, I talked upon the CapEx versus OpEx as one of the first point. That is the key thing which is talked upon when you start looking at some of the startup CIOs, and that's what their preference is, saying that how can they implement something which is going to provide services which is commensurate to the kind of the cash inflow as well as the outcome which you get from it. And at the same point of time, how do you make sure it's scalable? Reminds me of another example or another company where we were working. It was a small company into infrastructure services. They were very good at doing waterworks and so on and so forth, and their presence was in India. Surprisingly, they were working in some parts of Americas and some part of Europe. They went through a complete PE investment. So private equity came in, they said there is a whole lot of potential, you guys can grow significantly, we want to invest in you. The promoter of the company obviously wanted to make that money coming in, they invested significantly, and once this investment had happened upon, the point came saying that we want to grow at such a fast pace, the world is out there for us, but do we have mature IT systems? And the point came back to look upon something which is very basic, email services. And since this company had a presence in India and US, they had picked up a US service provider for providing email services, which was providing, and I didn't believe when I got to know about it, there was a US service provider which was providing email services for $7 per mailbox per year. That was the kind of the cash outflow which they were looking upon, and they were very happy with that kind of service being provided. Till the PE came in and they started looking at the kind of the services which were being provided upon. So half of the places they realized their responses to RFP didn't reach in time because the kind of the mailing services which they were using, that was always down, or nearly it was down. And in the current setup, they didn't even feel the need of augmenting it. And then when they started looking into it more deeper and going further down, they realized there were a whole lot of challenges which was never thought upon. It was an organization which was running very closely from this area next to Nehru Place. And then when they started looking at saying that how do they need to expand and stabilize technology with the business expansion plans, it suddenly came out that the kind of an investment that they need to do is significant. And the reason why it was coming out so significant was because it was never planned in the past. So it was pretty much happening a greenfield rather than a brownfield way. So there are different stages of maturity, different challenges that the CIO face upon. But the question really comes, what is that the CIO should be looking upon? Or what kind of a strategy should a CIO be following upon? Should it be more like what an ostrich does, burying your head in sand and just be ignorant of what's happening around the world? Is that the way it's happening? And probably what Steve Ballmer said, it's actually reflected over here, where they were so passionately engrossed in Microsoft Office solutions that they completely ignored what's happening around them, what's Samsung doing to them, what's Android doing to them, what's Apple doing to them. So the question really comes upon, if that's not the right thing to do you need to have a strategy? And what kind of a strategy do you need to have in place? But then the perennial question comes upon saying, what is strategy? Multiple answers. Anyone in the audience who wants to just, because it's quite a monologue here, but anyone in the audience who just want to pin some thoughts on saying, what is strategy? Sure.
Positioning that one wants.
Positioning what one wants. Firm wants. Okay, that's a good thought.
Sometimes just to know which doors not to open.
Which doors not to open?
Is also strategy. As
Okay.
an organization, you have multiple options.
Right.
Like Khulda Singh, don't open these doors. I don't want to do this one. That is also a strategy.
That's a good thought. That's a fair thought, and that's a very good point actually. Yeah.
And adding the IT as per the business load.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's a typical consultant answer. So thank you so much, because that's what I would have gone ahead and said. But thanks for bringing it up.
Technology integration.
Sorry, technology integration.
Enhancement.
Enhancements, technology integration. Yes, that's an outcome. Planning as well. Over there.
Anything which brings a value to your future projects, or anything which brings a value to a future project which you are going to deliver or which you are planning to deliver.
Okay, that's a
plan
good
for that. Like
you plan for it. So that's possibly what was also talked upon. Yeah, but it goes on to the project side of it. Yeah.
What to do, how to do, to planning for business point.
So what to do, how to do,
Yeah.
and have an effective plan
Yes,
around
yes.
it. Yeah, thanks for
Thinking out of the box.
thinking out of box. Yeah, that's one I was waiting for.
Do you want to go?
Where do you want to go? Yeah. Okay, I think that, as I said, all of us have said the right things. But when you start looking at some of the leaders, what are they saying around it? Let's because this is a workshop mode, this is a classroom mode. I'm supposed to talk on this, but you guys know it already all. Still, let me go through it. So, if you really see, right up there is Peter Drucker, who's considered to be the guru when it comes onto the strategy side of it. And what he says, strategy is about being different. Someone said out of the box. That's what it means. It means deliberately choosing a different set of activities to deliver a unique mix of value. So again, someone talked of how do you give business solutions around it, but it's just saying that how do you bring upon a thought which is completely different and still addressing the objective where the value addition really happens upon. And if you really see, again I was having a debate, and this was a debate which I was having with a global, very large global organization CIO, and we just got into this debate. I don't know how did the subject came upon, saying how did Apple get into this something what they have done, and that debate went on, and it was very interesting to get those perspective. They said that possibly Microsoft had shut doors for everyone else to get into Office enterprise space. It was so well entrenched at that point of time that no one could get into that space and challenge them. Google was trying to do with open office and so on and so forth, but it wasn't successful. And what was left upon, possibly for all the organizations, and that's what Apple picked upon, was to say that how can we provide an experience to the user which is so easy? What are the pain points that the users have which is not being addressed by the current office solutions, and we bring upon that. And that was the thinking which happened, which was completely different. And was it value adding? The first time when iPhone came upon, people were not sure, but look at the kind of the market which it has created. I'm not just talking about for Apple, I'm talking about the ecosystem which it has created. The projections which are there today for the mobile application market, it's expected to be a $20 billion worldwide market 2030, $40 billion 2014. It just doubles. And who gets the credit for it? In large ways it goes to Apple and it goes to Android. So how do you really think upon those areas where you want to be different and then put upon those activities to deliver which gives you maximum value? That's how it's defined upon. Look at it from a very, very different perspective. We're just saying an army general, what will be the key objectives for him? It's very simple. Science or art of combining and employing the means of war in planning and directing large military movements and operations, which is what we talked, saying establishing business objectives and how do we deliver on those business objectives through technical integration, through technology projects, and so on and so forth. So it's fairly well aligned. And the executives believe, this is more now insider view, where the CXOs of the organization, what do they really look upon? And the point really comes, it's the result of choices executives make on where to play, how to win, to maximize long-term value. So someone talked upon where, what, how, but I think the key point is to maximize value and actually look upon how do you maximize short-term value and a long-term value. And a strategy always needs to have a combination of a short-term and a long-term viewpoint. So that's, as I said, the thoughts are right, they're in the direction. It's that one objective to which we are aiming upon. And I established at the start of the session what is that one objective which I at least want when each one of you walk out of this room have very clearly out there, is what we talked upon in that slide which we saw that ostrich looking inside or duck the head inside the ground. That's not what we want to be. We want to be aware of what's happening around us. We want to be proactive. We want to be very clearly understanding how technology can add value to the business and work on that from a both long-term and a short-term perspective. We already talked, IT strategy is CIO's choice on where to play, how to win, to maximize long-term value. I think, again, this got discussed, so I don't want to spend too much time, but just from a semantics perspective, just wanted to be clear around it. Says that business drives IT, so if there is no business, is there a need for technology? And answer very clearly comes no. So the business has to be there where it drives technology, and it's other way around, where technology enables business in running it more efficiently, running it more effectively, and providing a sustainability around it. Most of the organizations today realize, and it's a classic story, let me switch back to some kind of manufacturing organizations. When they went through that side of it, which is business driving IT, they went through this huge ERP journey. Most of the manufacturing organization went through ERP journey. They said that there's a whole lot of inefficiency in the way information gets recorded, the transaction gets carried out, the MRP runs which happen in the organization, the way the production planning happens, and so on and so forth. So we need to be on an ERP platform. And that's where business drove IT. It was looked to be more of a business project than a technology project. Technology was making sure that the right infrastructure is available, right network connectivities are available, and so on and so forth. And most of the organizations got onto an ERP. Comes the challenge now, saying that the dependence on technology has become so much for these organizations that for any reason, if the technology is not available, what happens? The business shuts. And those alternate processes or the processes which they used to follow, the business used to follow upon when technology wasn't there, it gets faded away. So any new changes in the business process, it just goes into the technology, and that's where technology is now making the business. So that alignment is extremely, extremely important to make sure that once technology has reached that stage, how does technology constantly innovate, how does technology constantly enable in making enterprises winning by making sure that those business strategies are delivered. So what really IT strategy, why is there a need for an IT strategy? I think the first point we already got discussed, business IT alignment. But from a model perspective, that's how it really looks upon. Saying that there has to be a fit between the strategy which is directed towards the business environment, processes, supporting infrastructure, directed towards the operations. So what kind of a model should an organization be looking upon? Should it be more completely focused on the business strategy side, Should the IT strategy be hand in hand with the business strategy? Should there be a business strategy, but IT being operating at an infrastructure and a process layer, which is fairly closely aligned to business strategy? Or should that IT infrastructure be operating at an organizational infrastructure and processes? So there are a whole lot of combinations which exist. So if you look at the left side of it, the top side is the strategic view, which is from the business. The bottom side is the operational view, again from the business. The right side is where IT is more looking at the strategic view, and the bottom side is where IT is looking more at an operational view. The map has to be carried out correctly, saying that where do you want to get into. And the common question really comes upon saying where one needs to be. Should one be on the top right quadrant, top left quadrant, bottom left quadrant, bottom right quadrant? It has to be very clearly defined where you want to be. So if you really see, if you want to be in an area which is IT enabled growth, what does that mean? It really implies that you need to be completely aligned to the business strategy, and you should be completely effective in delivering those solutions. Now that's an aspiration. That's really an aspiration for most of the organization to reach upon. Where do organizations run at this point of time? I think organization, many times our experience and my personal experience has been organizations who are mature would be on the left top quadrant, which is saying that they believe they are highly aligned to the business, but they are not effective. When you start discussing from the CXO's perspective, the constant viewpoint which emerges upon is saying that while IT is doing so much, but is somehow not delivering the value which we expected upon. And that's what really comes upon the alignment trap. Or there's a whole lot of mix of organizations which get into what is called well-oiled IT. Well-oiled IT means the alignment is not there, but whatever is being done by technology, that's delivering value. So it's fairly at an operational level. You delivering email as a service is available, internet as a service is available, intranet as a portal is available, and so on and so forth. But you don't make sure whether it's completely aligned to the business strategy or not, and that's where it comes into the well-oiled IT. I think the red zone is very clearly the maintenance zone where you're not aligned and you're not very effective also in delivering it. So the constant aim, constant thought is to get onto the IT-enabled growth. And some of the key indicators whether you are in that zone or not in that zone is actually based on the financial spends which are happening. So if you really see the table which is on the right side, it shows that if you are in IT-enabled growth zone, then the spending would be lesser, and when we say lesser, it's fairly subjective. So the lesser means lesser to the average, and the CAGR will be greater. And that's in the alignment trap is absolutely opposite, where it says that the IT spend will be more because you're doing a lot of initiatives. Since the business is not getting value derived out of it, the CAGR will be low. So that's the kind of a way to look upon and say where you are, where do you want to follow upon, where do you want to aspire upon. I think one of the quotes which we had taken, one of our clients from Selective Insurance Group, Richard, he said, aligning a poorly performing IT organization to right business objectives still won't get the objectives accomplished, which is very clear. So if you're not able to deliver the value, which is what is alignment trap, less effective, but highly aligned to the business objective, is never going to deliver the value. So I think that aspiration for most of the organizations should be to move from a well-oiled IT to IT-enabled growth, rather than going through the trajectory of well-oiled IT to alignment trap and then getting into IT-enabled growth. And there are a whole lot of case studies which are available. One of the biggest challenges, and we're going to talk through as we quickly go through this session, saying that where does this alignment trap really comes upon? Why is this mindset really there, saying that technology doesn't understand business or vice versa? So we'll get into that as we move forward. I think the next one is investment management. Extremely important area. The way the models are emerging, completely changing. On demand has completely brought in a new dimension to it. Before I get into really what investment management is, I just wanted to bring upon this to the audience here. One of the constant challenges which CIOs faced in past was when they want to build up a resilience or when they wanted to build up a disaster recovery. In past, it was always a significant investment which was going upon, and putting upon a business case for it was never easy. Today, that environment has completely changed because there are a whole lot of things which are available on demand, and consequently what's happening, you pay as you use. Now, as that model completely got stabilized, possibly yes, possibly no, the jury is still not out there. There are a whole lot of discussions which are going out around that piece. But that's helping CIOs today to go back to the business and put together a very strong investment case. But that's been one of the areas which is huge challenge. Again, I'm helping another organization, not directly from investment, but working on a large transformation plan for the organization from technology perspective. And this happens to be their budgeting period. So August end was their budgeting period. They actually have spilled over in September, still going on the budgeting. And then one grudge which has been coming upon constantly is that board is not able to understand why technology needs that kind of a rupee value or a dollar value around it. So investment decisions are made when alignment is uncertain. So some business objectives may be jeopardized. So very clear view which is coming upon saying that if the board, if the CXOs of the organization, they really don't understand the value which is being created, putting together those investments becomes the most difficult objectives for the CIOs. And sometimes it goes by the case studies. You really look upon and say, there was a low priority project which was going on in the organization, and because that went on, it consumed a whole lot of resources, and that taints the viewpoint from the top management. So in that kind of an environment, you really don't have a very strong case how to go about and having a discussion around what kind of investment needs to be there. And there is a common misconception that IT expenditure represents sunk cost rather than business investment. Now, that's one of the biggest challenges which I was talking initially, saying that people really don't understand whether it's an investment which you're doing into an asset or it's a cost which is gone. And every IT investment has an AMC, which is a recurring cost around it, and that's the CFOs most of the time are not concerned about the cost which is one time. They are more concerned about what are we locking in on a going forward basis, because that's going to get every year on year on year. And many times from a technology side of it, the focus is so much on the one-time cost, because that's a significant number. So how do we really make ourselves that much smart, that much wiser when we start looking upon from the investment management perspective? So there are three categories in which investment will really come on. If I was to start from bottom, keep the lights on. I think that's very basic, saying that how do you make sure what you're providing upon gets provided on a constant basis. So if you're users, you've been providing email service, you continue providing those email services. If you provide authentication services, you keep on providing those authentication services. How do you make sure that you help business to grow by running projects? And how do you put together effective business cases around it? And that's where comes the grow the business. So talking about what kind of projects need to be there, what kind of growth needs to be looked upon, what kind of discretionary spend needs to come. And the last, which is the most aspirational, is around transformation in the business, which is saying what kind of an investment needs to really get to go upon in the innovation side of it. And those are the three categories. And if you really see, the risk increases as we move from bottom to the top. So everyone understands, when you talk on lights on, people understand what's the kind of a budget which is required and why it's required. When you start getting onto the projects, the challenge really comes upon how effectively can you bring upon a business case. How effectively do you say what's the value realization which can happen, and how can you measure that value realization? So that becomes a question which comes in. And when you get into transformation, and the essential definition of the transformation is where the growth or the outcomes are exponentially higher than what it is currently, the risk is the most significant at that point of time. So the real question comes upon is that how do you structure the IT budget across a whole lot of these categories? And these categories are globally well established. If you really see, this is coming from ITIL, so globally accepted upon categories from an IT investment perspective. Then the question really comes upon saying how do you do a prioritization when you start getting into IT budget to an IT portfolio perspective? I think there's a prerequisite which is more in terms of saying what as technology leaders, what as CIOs, people need to carry out, and then how does the prioritization matrix really come as an outcome of it. So if you really see The prerequisite is you need to very clearly identify what are the IT costs which are transparent, which is very clearly visible, which has to be sustained and incurred year on year. Have very clearly vision, which is saying what do I want to operate upon. So have an explicit operating vision. Have very clear identified upon process owners, because they are the ones who are going to support upon when you start looking at the project cost, and that's where the bind really comes upon the process owners and the process lead. And make sure that there is a rigorous project governance, because that gives a healthy perspective to the management that when we are incurring this investment, when we are going for this cost, we are making sure that there is a governance mechanism and it's not a sunk cost, there is a business value associated with it. As we do, we put together these prerequisites, then comes the prioritization matrix. So what kind of a prioritization should be carried out? Looking upon the two axes, where the x-axis really talks upon the difficulty in execution. So it could be in terms of the cost, it could be in terms of the time, it could be in terms of the risk, and the value or the importance which we place on the y-axis, which is saying that what's the kind of a revenue or a revenue growth or the cost impact and so on and so forth which can happen. Something which is not difficult and high value adding is a no-brainer. It's a quick win. That's where having discussions around the investment actually is, it's a given. So that's a completely green square which is available. The place where the real challenge comes is the top right quadrant, which is saying that the value is high, though the difficulty is also high. The risk associated with it is high. And that's where the most number of questions really come upon, saying that how do you make sure that it's strategic, whether we will be able to get the outcomes which we expect or will not get the outcomes which we expect upon. So the question many times come upon, do you want to do the complete initiative or do you want to split the initiative into multiple phases? And based on the phase and the outcome of that phase, you take a decision for the next phase from there on. So that's the kind of a typical question which really comes upon. Something which is difficult to do, but the value is minimal, should not be even looked upon from an investment perspective. It's a very clearly red zone, not to get into it. And something which is quick to do, but not so significantly value adding, you can consider, provided you have resources being available. Now that becomes a good prioritization allocation matrix in which you can prioritize, but be aware of the top right quadrant, because that's where the questions really come upon, and how do you make yourself relevant from answering those questions or providing a business justification around those questions. Again, if you really see, these are some of the models which have been globally tried, tested, and being followed upon. To me, and my experience has been, these models are very directional. All of this gives us a direction in which how we should be going ahead and approaching it. It doesn't mean that this model is what fits the best for your organization, but it gives us a thought process in terms of saying that how should we be creating those investment plans, how should we be projecting that from a decision-making perspective, and how should we be presenting it to the CXO community. That's the entire thought which really goes on in helping this. I think the common question which I already talked upon is saying that should you be having CapEx or should you be having an OpEx kind of an environment? More often organizations leaning towards the latter rather than the former, but there is again a mixed bag around it, saying what you should be doing and what you not be doing. To make sure that all of us are at the same page, capital expense means the capital cost covers upon the purchase of assets for long-term use within the organization, so you incur the entire cost, versus operational costs are day-to-day costs which are relevant to operation of device, component, piece of equipment or facility. In some ways it can be said that you incur the cost as you use the asset rather than you invest in the asset and then you use it. That's the way you look upon. Various kind of cost types which an organization will be having: hardware, which is IT infra; software, which is software assets; some kind of fixed asset, fixed environmental cost, which is more in terms of the real estate; and the external services. Again, both sides of it, there is a capital cost, operational cost. I think more and more are now leaning on the hardware side to see which was more traditional, a capex element, to how do you move forward to an opex element. Software as a service is today providing that option of leaning from a capex to an opex model. However, the adoption is again not so prevalent at this point of time. Beyond some of the standardized service, so email as a service may be a standardized service which is available today and fairly well established. That's where the movement is happening from a campus to OpEx. I think the real estate side of it, while it talks of furniture, storage areas and so on and so forth, I was to put it from a technology perspective, data centers, and that's one area where the investments are very high if you do a capex-based data center. And the movement which is happening at this point of time from a capex to an opex in terms of hosted data centers is significant. And again, it goes back to the cloud story which is going around in terms of saying what's the kind of availability which is there from an infrastructure perspective and the real estate perspective. External services, which is saying that how do you have your vendors, how do you have your service provider community. So again, the thought is more to move upon to the operational side of it, where you provide as you incur that kind of a cost or you get that kind of a value. So that's the element which is there from a capex versus an opex perspective. Sure. Yeah.
You say that many of the IT OEMs,
Yeah.
they're moving to this capex to the OpEx. So where is the opportunity to
Move to an opex kind of an
correct?
environment, right?
So you don't invest upfront in the hardware because typically in 3 years your hardware is there is not of
It
much
will
value.
run out of the life.
So in your own experience of consulting to the companies, how are you seeing it evolving? Do you see, is there a tipping point at which some organizations should choose that model? Under what circumstances? If you can share with us.
Okay, that's a good question. Saying when should an organization look from a capex to an opex perspective? I think it's if I was to say there are 3 categories which are there. Category 1, organizations who have already invested significantly. Now, when you have invested significantly, you really can't get onto an OpEx model immediately, and you are always caught upon in that kind of a situation. What do you do with an investment? And there's already a commitment which has been made to the organization, and that's where the biggest challenge really comes upon in adopting the OpEx model. More often than not, those organizations continue with a capex model for the time being, for that period, which is normally it's a period which is not considered 3 years, it's a 5 years, but from a technology obsolescence perspective, I agree, 5 years becomes 3 years. And if you really look from a fixed asset depreciation perspective also, it's a 3 years what's considered upon. The category 2 organizations are the ones which had some very basic infrastructure in place, and now they're going for significant IT enablement, and that's where organizations are looking upon how can they leverage on this model which is being available to be using some of these models in the form of cloud or some of these which is on demand kind of a thing. So that's again a relatively easier one which comes upon. I think the category 3 is the toughest one, where the organizations are somewhere in the mix. So it's like if I was to say what kind of those organizations are, they will be more who have not looked at IT very strategically, but their investments are already significant in IT from that industry perspective. There is always the question mark, how do you deal with those situations, because the CXOs, or more not CXOs, the CFO always comes back and says that we should be looking at an OpEx model, but how does that OpEx model get dovetailed well with the CapEx model which is already there is the biggest question mark. I think the kind of a case study which I was initially talking about, this organization which was fairly small and then got a private equity investment into it, they went through the same cycle, absolutely same cycle, and the surprise part was that they eventually went on a CapEx model, right? So the thought was that they would have gone for an OpEx model, but eventually the outcome was that they picked up a CapEx model. So I think that question mark really comes upon in that kind of organization. Is there a tipping point? Is there a point where you say that which one should be good, which one is better than other? I think one very clear case which comes out, and again I talked, was from a resilience perspective. I think that's where the tipping point is already available, saying that rather than doing investments on your own, you start looking at what's available from an OpEx perspective. The other thing which really influences it is the kind of an industry in which you are, and what's the regulator asking, and what's the regulator demanding. So when you start looking at some of these highly regulated sectors, say financial services, banking and financial services, there are fairly stringent requirements which come in from regulators. So if you are a bank, RBI has fairly stringent requirements. If you're an insurance company, IRDA has a fairly stringent requirements. And that's where you start looking upon saying that should I go into a model which is more services based model, but then I have so many challenges with the regulator, makes sense to have it in-house and being able to provide that kind of information. The other sector which is fairly regulated is telecom. And if you are one of the service providers to telecom ecosystem, again because TRAI has or DOT has whole lot of requirements which come in from a national security perspective. And that's where you really see that while they may fit in a category A, B, C, but they may not be adopting so much on-demand kind of solutions. That's the kind of thing. But yeah, most of the third category, which is again fairly regulated, is the pharmaceutical, life sciences. Again, most of them want to keep it in-source rather than getting it outsourced. But there are complete examples which may be contradicting to it. I know large public sector banks who have completely outsourced their data centers. And completely outsource their core banking system application, which is the key system for them to run upon, to large service providers. So there are those kind of examples which are available, but there are multiple factors which really go in saying that which model should be looked upon. Okay, I think the next one is really talking upon how do you do assessment of whether IT is successful. And I really look forward to organizations where they really say that IT has been strategic for us to take that kind of a lead from a business perspective. It's easier for organizations where the business is so dependent on technology. So when you start looking at IT enabled services organization, there is a whole lot of alignment which is there, and if IT is not able to provide that kind of a quantum jump, business will not grow. Or a telecom, where again technology plays a very important part. But when you start looking at more traditional B2B or business to consumer kind of FMCG kind of organization, you start realizing that kind of an appreciation may not be there. And that becomes the most significant challenge for the IT head in terms of saying that how do you assess the success of IT? The challenge really comes upon saying that has IT been able to fulfill the strategic and business need? So do you have a right or wrong answer saying that whatever IT did it meet the strategic objectives and the business goals? Did we take best IT options for decision making? So again the question which came, did we do the right things for going a CapEx mode rather than OpEx or vice versa? And the kind of the budget which we put together, was that appropriate? Was that on the higher side? Was that on the lower side? So again, the question really becomes a challenge in terms of saying, how do you determine what the answers are to this question? Now, there are models which are available, which helps for a formal assessment in a very, very structured manner. So if you really look upon, there are two models, which is one is a routine process overview and the other one is a more non-routine process overview. Depending on the culture which is there in the organization, either one of those models can be looked upon, as long as the end objective is being attained, and the end objective is very clearly to ensure that benefits of IT are realized as they were planned upon. One biggest challenge which we have realized, and as a consultants, we really track upon the value which gets delivered in very long-term projects. So a project a large IT project which may go on for 18 months or 24 months. Many times when you get into the project life cycle, the focus, time, energy of the entire management gets into making sure that we hit the timeline which we had planned for. And rather than saying what were the objectives with which we started the project upon. But we bring in that perspective to most of the organizations, saying that how do you realize what were the objectives which were set upfront, and as you went through the journey of 18 to 24 months, you were making sure that you were completely aligned to those objectives and those benefits got realized. I'll give you a case. Again, we're working on a very, very large business transformation for a large conglomerate in India. And as part of that business transformation, technology transformation is one significant track as part of the key aspect which came upon was saying that it's very easy to measure upon if you do changes in the procurement process from a business side of it, what's a kind of a tangible outcome when it comes. But when you do an associated change in the ERP environment which they're using or enhancements in the ERP, how do you make sure what's a kind of a rupee value benefit which the organization gets? Extremely difficult, extremely challenging. And we have put together a matrix today which gives them a view saying that every month that investment is not incurred in the ERP, what's the kind of a potential benefit which they are not able to realize upon? It's so powerful, and it became a very good business case for internal selling in the organization, because the investment which was being talked upon was something which, if the decision making process took 4 months, that benefit would have been accrued to nearly the kind of the investment in that 4 months period. So when the data point came back to the management, it became a no-brainer, saying that if we would have taken this decision 4 months ago for this investment, it would have been repaid by now. So that's where there are very structured ways and means of how do you quantify, how do you monitor, and how do you measure it. Again, as I said, it's a routine process overview, non-routine process overview. So you get into what is the IT investment, you look upon various performance data, you do data and baselining. So the one case which I have talked, we have followed this routine process overview where we picked up the data before we started the project. What was the baseline at that point of time? We defined the thresholds, we defined what end objectives we really want to reach up to. Monitor the thresholds periodically. So as you go through the various stages, you really monitor those thresholds on an ongoing basis. And then report to business and IT manager. And if there are deviations which are identified in a positive or a negative direction, or the lead or that kind of indicators, you start taking those corrective actions based on it. Very scientific, very proven approach. It's a routine process, as I was talking upon. Very effective. But many times, sorry. No, go ahead, ask please.
More talk about the business and IT alignment.
Yeah.
And then when we talk about assessment, question number one is that who's the assessor in that sense, right?
Sure.
And second, because of this alignment, more and more we talk about our performance in terms of the business KPIs, right?
Yeah.
Increase in revenue and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it becomes and then there are the other KPIs like my technology performance, productivity, utilization, which probably business won't even care.
Sure.
Right? Now when you talk about the KPIs like the increase in revenue or go to market and whatnot, then business really would see in black and white as to what IT's contribution should be. And that's where this assessment then becomes more of how aligned, how could these people go along.
Absolutely, agree. Absolutely.
So does it really work in that sense?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's where I was saying it's not easy to do. I'll give you again the same example which I talked, the procure to pay cycle, where we're talking from a business perspective. It's fairly easy to measure if you do the changes in the process. Vis-a-vis when you start making those changes in an NN module or a procurement module or in an advanced supplier integration portal along with it, it becomes that much more difficult to say that how has it helped in getting them. I think let me not build upon a grand dream over here saying that it's easy to do. It's not easy. Who are the right stakeholders? Depends in each organization. Many places it will be the CFO of the organization. In many cases I've seen the COO will be involved. And some of these really large transformation, the CEO himself will be involved. CEO or the board will get involved. And the one which I'm referring is actually where the board is involved. Possibly it's easier in this situation because I was giving an example which is a business transformation where there are KPIs and matrices which are identified and defined upon for end-to-end business cycle, and technology matrices are getting filled up over there. But if you start looking at it from an isolation, it becomes that much more difficult. But is it not possible? I think the answer is no, it is possible. It's just that how do you go about doing it? So again, let me give you an example. Inventory turnover ratio, that's a very, very common thing. Now, most of the times you go to the inventory planner, stores manager, and so on and so forth. They always believe that they're doing the best what they can do. That inventory is most optimized, the turnover ratios are the best in the industry, and so on and so forth. But when you start getting into more deeper, more often than not, you realize that there are inefficiencies in the process. And why is the inefficiency in the process? You realize the information is not available on an online basis. Why is the information not available on the online basis? The stores are not connected on an online basis. So there's someone who's capturing information. Then there is a way that information really gets into a technology system. Then it comes back to the stores manager, whoever the person is, and then the decision making happens and planning happens thereon. The moment you start saying that if this is the reason why there are inefficiencies, and if you bring in a solution which may be more mobility kind of a solution, where the stores don't have a connectivity directly from technology, you don't have a network connectivity going in there, but there are some solutions which are mobility driven, whereby the information is available then and there in forms and shape, and that helps in bringing that inventory ratio further down, and which helps in bringing the capex or the opex or more on the operating expense side, which brings down the opex for the organization and bring in more efficiency and effectiveness for the entire process. That's the kind of a comparison which needs to be done with respect to the cost which gets incurred.
The issue with that is, we talk about IT taking strategic role even at a planning stage.
Absolutely.
Now here, this example that you quoted talks about our IT coming in a reactive mode.
Yes.
So even there's a problem statement where IT role is not known explicitly, and hence the inventory turnover ratio is that much in with IT coming. So now that's like straightforward.
Sure.
Now we've consciously invited IT, but then it's reactive. The point is about it going upfront. That's my question. What if IT don't play a strategic role from the get-go? And from that point of view, how do we do that?
Okay, that's again a very good question. So while you can say it was reactive, but if you really see from when I started the problem statement, I said the business process owner felt that they were doing the best already. They didn't even realize that they were not doing the best. So from that perspective, it may not be reactive. It may be thinking beyond what was the normal business process. But let me give you another instance. And again, it's the very commonly discussed topic. Boundaries blurred, whether it's technology, it's business, it's a Salesforce automation. And the complete thought which goes in the investment in Salesforce and investment in CRM. Is that something which is going to help organization in improving their top line or not helping organization to improve their top line? Is it a proactive? It's more often than not, it's a proactive call which happens upon. The common debate which really goes upon is saying that business really says what the competition is doing in the world. The place where technology has to really come upon and say that looking at the kind of a business in which we are as our organization, the model in which we are, what is the most optimal usage of technology which can be done? Because SFA is available, a Salesforce automation tool is available out there. Can we just go blindly and adopt it because the competition has done it? Again, there are two views. One says that just go ahead, do it, and we'll see what outcome is. But I think the technology really needs to say upon saying that what best fits in for their organization, how the processes need to be structured, and how do you get the benefits out of it. So I agree to that question, and I said I don't want to build the grand view that it's very easy to do. It purely depends on how the organizations are structured, how technology is positioned in the organization, and as we go forward, I think one of the areas which I'm going to talk on is exactly the same, saying that where normally technology gets positioned in the organization and where it should be in an ideal situation, and that's many times drive this entire process on the measurement and the monitoring side of it. Just from a completion perspective, so while we talk on the routine process overview, there's a non-routine process overview, and this is more today what is called the agile way of working, where you do a simulation, you don't wait for a waterfall kind of a thing. You do simulation, you see what's the kind of an outcome which you're getting. It's a quick assessment in terms of saying whether you're going in the right direction, not going in the right direction, and then you carry out a performance reviews. The trends are that more often than not, now most of the organizations are getting into an outcome-based kind of a model, which is more getting onto the non-routine process overview. And I think the world is changing. Again, I go back to that example which I talked upon, iOS 7 getting released. Now, with the kind of a time in which the operating systems are getting updated and being released upon, the life has reduced so much that if you follow the standard waterfall kind of a methodology and all of those things, you really won't come. The time will be really out of the. Sorry. Okay. Okay, I just given an indication I need to pace myself faster, so I'll try doing that. CIOs need to develop their own performance scorecard. I think that's very clear. The multiple ways in which you can do the scorecarding, balanced scorecard view, which is most talked upon. But I think 4 key matrices which a CIO should be looking. What's the innovation quotient which the CIOs have? What's the customer quotient which the CIOs have? Customers could be internal, external, both. What's the finance quotient which the CIO looks upon, which is more from a monetary perspective? And what's the process quotient which a CIO should be looking upon? So it's a combination across all of these 4 quadrants. I think with that we move on to the next area, which is very close to me. And well, I've been told that I just have 10 minutes now. Given an opportunity, I can talk on this for 10 hours. But we'll do justice for 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes for this one. I think biggest area or biggest challenge which most of the IT organizations get into, or the CXOs really get into, is the kind of the risk to which organizations are exposed upon. I'll talk about this case study. Again, recently we were working for a very large national healthcare chain which has a lot of hospitals across the country. And they have a very complex and very advanced IT systems. Now, those IT systems are the ones which deal with the patient health information. Apparently not so much regulated in our country, but if you really see overseas, it's a very regulated information or very controlled information. They had some incidents where that information was being shared upon within that environment, outside their organization, outside their hospitals. And because there is a parallel industry which runs around it completely, that information becomes very helpful for the growth of the that parallel industry. So they really get to know who are the patients, what's the kind of treatment they are going upon, what's the kind of medication they are into, what's the kind of alternate therapy they could be looking upon, and so on and so forth. So that information really becomes so much helpful. And this organization said that we really don't know how this information is really going out of where we have that information stored upon. And that's one biggest challenge which most of the CXOs in the organization believe, saying that while we have created this entire IT systems, which is so complex, so useful, so beneficial, and now have we created a centralized data pool which is available so that someone gets that data pool and I lose my competitive advantage over there. And that's where you really come upon the question saying that, do you have effective IT risk program in place? So once you have enabled the business, how are you making sure that business is now not getting exposed to IT risk because of that information being available? And how do you manage that risk on an ongoing basis? So some of the surveys which were conducted upon global studies, KPMG does a lot of these, which showcases that there is investment in effective IT risk programs increasing. And it's, to me, there are two triggers for the increase. Either an organization goes through something what I talked about, it goes through an incident, that's when the thought really goes in. Or the second is when someone is pushing them to go through it, which happens in the case of BPOs and ITES because their customers are pushing them for it, or the regulators are pushing for it. So it comes back to the telecom industry or BFSI industry where the regulators are pushing for it. Those are the two key drivers which I've seen in the country. And there are a whole lot of organizations who don't spend formal IT risk management as a program. What is the IT risk? Just from a definition perspective, the IT risk means there are potential that a given threat will exploit vulnerabilities on an asset or a group of assets and thereby cause harm to the organization. So it's really saying that we are exposed, as we put upon systems, there are multiple vulnerabilities which get into the systems. If those vulnerabilities are exploited upon, the threat gets realized and the threat is having an effect on the value to the business, and that's where the risk is emerging upon. It's always measured in terms of a combination of what's the probability of an event to happen and what's the outcome. If that event happens, what's the outcome that you're looking upon. There are multiple drivers. If you don't have effective IT governance process, there's a high likelihood of IT risk happening upon. You have complexity, but it's not controlled well, which again goes back to the governance. You get exposed to IT risk, or if you haven't given attention to risk, then it comes upon. I think the formula is very simple. It just says that what's the vulnerability index, what's the associated risk index, and what's the asset value. So if an asset gets compromised, if the ERP gets compromised, the asset value is the most significant for an organization. That's where the risk is high. Vis-a-vis a static information portal gets compromised, the information may not be having so much value. So that's where the linkage really goes back to the asset value. You really need to map it because the question comes, what kind of a position should you be taking from a risk treatment perspective? Should you be becoming completely risk agnostic and try to cover upon all the kind of scenarios, or you should be looking upon prioritizing those? This kind of helps in prioritizing, saying that what's the severity vis-a-vis what's the likelihood. So the one which really are the bottom ones, if you really see, The ones which are in the acceptable risk kind of a situation are actually not part of risk management. They are an ongoing process of power failure, corrupt database, and so on and so forth. This needs to be part of your standard operating processes. The ones which are on the more on the top right side of it are the ones where you need to start planning for the risk management. So that's the way how risk needs to be managed upon. I think the last, with that I come on to my last section, which is where I was saying the position between IT and business. You know, there are multiple walls when IT really gets discussed. One of the walls which always gets discussed is a firewall. But the one, there is no wall over there, but it's called firewall. The other wall which is always called upon is the wall which says that there is a wall between business and IT. Business says IT doesn't understand us and vice versa. IT believes that they are completely an IT business, but somehow business is not appreciating what they do. What could be the reasons? Why is there these differences? I think while there are multiple differences, one of the key difference which we realize is the language difference. It's the way we articulate, the way we talk, and the way we position ourselves. If we try positioning ourselves more in a technology world, trust me, business people will completely get switched off. And that happens more often than not because we are very good at throwing those jargons. And let's not blame ourselves because that's a kind of an environment ecosystem in which we grow, in which we sustain ourselves. That's the biggest challenge. Social influence, because that's how you see everywhere. That's what the business believes. Difficulty in managing the changing technology because the business believes that the world is moving so fast with technology. It's only our IT function which works at such a slow pace. And you know, how do you keep on managing with the changing technology? If the governance is not right, obviously there are challenges and there are mindset differences. Those challenges continue upon. How do you really break that wall? I think that's the key question. To say that while this wall exists, it's a no-brainer that the wall doesn't exist. There are organizations where this wall is much lesser in height. We see some of the organizations where the wall is so much higher. I think some of the key things which need to be done, and it needs to be done by the leader of the technology function, where the difference is whether you get positioned as a CTO or a CIO. The real difference is when you start positioning as a CTO, you talk technology, but the moment you get positioned as a CIO, you talk more business, you talk more information. So how do you bring in business literacy for IT? How do you make yourself making sure internally in your teams, people understand what is that business really want? The leader of the function needs to have that bigger picture view so that very clearly understands what's the kind of an objective, what's the kind of a driver for us, what's the risk return, and then create demand for those kind of IT solutions. So, you know, as those solutions really go around, how do you create demand for it? I think selling, internal selling is something which is most important element. And avoid getting lost in translation. Many times you just get lost in translation saying that this is what I meant. You know, you should not even get into that situation where what you mean. It should be there what business understands. So I think those are the key things what you should be looking for. I think the last section which I really hit on is saying that what do you need to do. So IT strategy is required by every organization. It may be the size, shape, volume of organization which may really define upon how complex or how simple it needs to be. The new CIO should be looking at the big picture. So is it like a, you know, the term is Chief Information Officer, but then the view really gets upon saying that are you a Chief Infrastructure Officer where you're more internal focused and technology focused, or you are a Chief Intelligence Officer, or a Chief Innovation Officer, or a Chief Integration Officer? I think the CIO should be moving towards a Chief Innovation Officer. That's the aspiration where one should be moving upon. You know, day-to-day operations could often be misconstrued as strategic work. So don't get into too much of what's, why's, how's. Have a broader vision, broader view being elevated, drive towards it. These day-to-day operations will be there. That's business as usual. You can't avoid it. But if you get deeply engrossed in those, you miss out on the bigger picture, which is there. Look upon this as a process rather than as an event, because most, if you really see, only 23% of the organization look at it as an ongoing process rather than a one-time thing. And the converse is really relevant, which means that the remaining percentage of organization look at it at one point of time and then really not monitor around it. Strategic planning is something which is a continuous journey. Be proactive rather than reactive. I think Microsoft CEO already talked upon it. And the question is for each one of us is saying, who am I? Am I a proactive one or am I a reactive one? I think some of the quotes will just bring upon saying that happy CEO delusional about CIO's performance and so on and so forth. I think this one is important. Saying 78% of CEO surveys say that they are happy with the job performance of their CEOs. Fewer than half have any confidence in IT has contributed to business success. So it's a mixed thing which is available around. CIO role is very demanding. We already talked upon top focus areas, what needs to be done. I think a quick recap around it over here is there. I think the most important one is the reporting, because someone asked that question saying how do you really look upon the structuring. The survey says 43% are reporting into CEO, 19% to CFO, and CEO is 13%. This is global stats, so may not be so relevant from an Indian perspective, because in India you tend to see the CFO percentage going up rather than the CEO percentage going up. That's how it's coming upon. I think we've already covered upon this. I just wanted to leave with this, saying that what are the top priorities for the CIO? Is it digital transformation? Is it enterprise mobility? Is it analytics? Is it customer experience? Is it collaborative association? And if you really see, none of this is technology. All of these are business solutions. And that's what really needs to be the focus or top priority for the new generation CIO. I think that's where I just want to take a pause, because I think I'm completely out from my time which was dedicated. But a food for thought is that you should look upon your personal leadership journey from where you start to where you aim. Always there is a 5-step model which really comes upon, but you look upon where you are. Think big, start small, and deliver quickly. That's the most important thing. As you deliver, the confidence level goes up. Thank you so much, and really apologies because I ran over. Let me thank the participants over here as well. Making this session interactive, as Giri said, that some of you may be knowing me because I've been running this session for a while now. In past, it has been a real monologue. I was really happy today there was a dialogue going around. I would have been happier if the dialogue was much more, but I think given the kind of time constraints we were having, this was a good session. And as I bring it to an end, I just want to go back to that picture of the ostrich and want to leave that objective for each one of us, saying that should we be inward looking or should we be really looking around what's happening around the world on us. And as we move out of this room, really make sure that we are more proactive in making those decisions and aligning ourselves with the business. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Atul. As always, wonderful session. And I know you're extremely passionate about this subject, so any amount of time would have been inadequate.
Sure.
So, but thank you so much for being here. I think we could take a couple of questions if people have any. So I think this question here. But please keep it very concise. Thank you.
No, your experience, if you see whatever industry you talk about, various industries, if you see the position of the CIO, she's not part of the actually the management board, right? There the question begins, whatever management take the decision, ultimately that board chair needs to follow. Though he takes some of the business decisions, but how is your finding? Is there a thinking going on that this board chair should be part of the management decisions?
Okay, that's a good question, and I can make out the relevance that the response which is coming from the audience. So thanks for bringing that question up. I think I picked up one of the statistics which said that what's the global view coming in from CIO reporting structure perspective, which you saw that most of them were reporting into the CEO. But that's not right for the country in which we are. Let's be very clear. More often than not, the CIOs are reporting into the CFOs. It's only those organizations where technology is really, a group. It's a driver for the business. is without technology the business cannot be enabled, is where you get to see the CIOs reporting into the boards or the CEOs. Do we see that kind of a shift happening where the number of CIOs start reporting into the CEOs or to the board? It's difficult. Let me be very clear over here. But increasingly, what's happening is organizations have realized the power of technology which is coming. And there is that kind of a switch which is happening where organizations are saying that should we be looking CIOs or IT function just as infrastructure keepers, or should we start looking as CIOs or IT function who can significantly add value to the business? I think the challenge is onto this community saying how do we position ourselves internally in the organization. As I said, do we keep on continuing to be the translators? If we continue to be translators, we'll be there at what level we are. Vis-a-vis, if we are able to bring upon a value prop which is more aligned to the business, that's where we further move ahead in that kind of a direction what you're talking about. Is that journey short? Is that journey simple? I think the answer is very no. It's not too short, it's simple journey.
Atul, your opinion, one more.
There's one question here, I come back to you.
My question is about the operations, for IT operations. Strategy is very good to talk, but the business demand always comes as on yesterday.
Yeah.
So how the strategy work?
How will the strategy work? And that's what my question was, that don't get lured by the operational requirements. That's business as usual. That will always happen. And I think that's where the leaders have to differentiate themselves by saying that the lights are kept on, the conflicting requirements are always met, but that vision or that focus on that end objective is never lost upon. And if you really look upon from leaders of any function, why do we talk on technology only? Pick up any business leader, they deal with conflicts every day. But that doesn't mean that your entire time and energy goes in just managing those conflicts and you miss out that bigger picture. I think that's a key ask for the CIOs to really look upon.
Hi, Atul.
No, can I just address this one first?
No, he was in the queue.
Oh, he's in the queue. Okay, sorry.
You got too many questions.
Sorry.
Atul, actually, I have been working with the IT operations and projects with diversified verticals.
Sure.
But now I've moved into governance factor.
Okay.
And I'm acting as an external advisor for PM and ICT governance.
Sure.
And here I have a very small but very critical question which has been ongoing. I have tried to align business scorecards from IT and business perspective in a progressively evolving mode. But that always creates a difference. It becomes a stigma for the business people and IT people to take it that how can a business scorecard can be progressively evolved. It has to be predefined and static till the end. So I need advice on that because I feel this can really create a difference for this alignment.
Right. So let me put the question in two parts, what we are seeing. The first part is where IT is saying that rather than having standard scorecards, we'll have a business needs scorecards. Is that change easy? It's not easy at all. So if that change itself is not easy, if you're trying to change it on the business side of it, God just help you. That's all I can say. But I think the direction in which one needs to go, and as you talked about from governance perspective, I think the first step is to get IT having those scorecards or KPIs in the business. If you are able to do, and that journey is not going to be small. Dealing with exactly same situation, and the organization is now saying that this year they have piloted that and they know it won't go through. They are looking at a horizon of 18 months to 24 months before they get established on that one, and that's when they should be looking at the business side of it. That's what I was going to say.
Hi, Atul. Actually, I know you for the last 10 years. I know how you are and all your this and all that.
Sure.
My question is very funny, you can say that.
Thanks for bringing
CIO should report to CFO or CEO? CIO should report to CFO or CEO?
You want a theoretical answer, idealistic answer, or a practical answer?
The bit practical.
The practical answer is, it's based on what's happening today, and we already talked around that. Theoretical answer or an aspiration, I would say, should be not reporting into a CFO. It should be reporting into a CEO, or it should be reporting into a board, because that's how the organizations. That's why they're called CXOs, right? today having that kind of a position already, but that would be more often than not in companies where technology is the real enabler for the business. And that it is happening. There is a mindset shift which is coming across. I think the way CFOs have been positioned is where they take care of most of the support functions in the organization, and that IT is considered to be a support function. How do we make that transition from saying IT is not a support function, but an enabler to the business? Is what is the key task for each one of us, and that's how we make it. So I don't think that's a money question. You said it's a money question. It's a very practical question, and it will evolve over time. That's all I can say.
But nowadays, India, there is a lot of things coming in. They will be report to the CSO.
Yes, that's very good. That's how it's positioned.
So, thank you, Atul. I think I'm sorry to have to interrupt this Q&A. I know lots of you are interested in getting lots of download from Atul, but we are running a little bit behind schedule. I'll ask Atul if he will be around for a bit. Yeah, so he'll be here. So please catch up with him after the next session, which I am sure all of you is going to enjoy as well, because it's generally one of our most engaging sessions as like IT strategy. Though I assure you all these sessions today will be really very good. So thank you, thanks once again for being here and for partnering with us on this. We really appreciate all your support and your help. So big round of applause. So now